Hello YouTube, long time no see. Today's video, I'm going to show you how to install and run Apache Nutch, the web crawler. Um, I've I've spent the last well over a year accumulating a lot of knowledge in this area. I'm no expert. There's a lot of things I still myself am not fully knowledgeable about. But I'll do my best to show you what I know. And the reason I'm making this video is because there really is kind of a shockingly small amount of information surrounding Apache Nutch, how to install, how to use, and definitely surrounding the details of it, like the ways to fine tune it and to really get the most use from it. But even just installing and running it for the first time is difficult. There's a few tutorials, all mostly text tutorials that go over it, but they can be hard to follow if you don't know the intricacies of Nutch, and I know a lot of them now, so I felt kind of obligated to make this video and teach it as best as I can. I'm going to be using Nutch 2.0, and the reason for that is very simple, and that's because Nutch 2.0 has the ability to resume a web crawl should it be terminated for whatever reason. If your server goes down or you have a power failure or whatever. So if you're in the middle of a large web crawl and you're crawling hundreds of thousands or even millions of pages and the crawl is terminated for some reason in the middle or towards the end before it completes fully, Nutch 2.0 has the capability to resume the crawl from wherever it left off. Nutch 1.0, however, does not have this capability, so once you start a crawl, you better hope that it finishes or you'll get nothing. And for me, that was kind of a deal breaker because what the crawling that I've been doing lately has been for millions of pages, and I kind of need to know that should something go wrong, that I won't lose what I've already gotten, what I've already scraped. But the reason that I even mention this at all is because I just want to make it known, clarify that it seems that Nutch 2.0 has sort of lost support, or maybe not that it's lost support, but that there's a big update coming or something like this, because the last release for Nutch 2.0 was in 2016, so now almost 3 years ago, whereas the latest release for Nutch 1.0 was last year, 2018. So it seems like Nutch 1.0 is still considered to be the latest and the greatest. Now, Nutch 1.0 definitely has a lot of functionality capability. It's better than Nutch 2.0 in a lot of ways, but again, because of that resume feature lacking, I myself have to use Nutch 2.0, so that's what I'll be showing, demonstrating today. So the only other issue with that is the fact that so we have Apache Hadoop, which is for running very large-scale crawls where there are so many pages, maybe billions of pages, that one machine is not adequate to complete the crawl in any meaningful amount of time. So Hadoop coordinates a large crawl and will delegate small segments of the crawl to different machines and split it up, on a distributed network, a distributed system. So you can do much larger scaling crawls with Nutch 1.0, and the problem is I've not myself been able to get Nutch 2.0 to work with Hadoop. I've tried every way I could possibly think of. I've researched it for days and weeks and months, and there's no official tutorial from Apache on how to rectify Nutch 2.0 with Hadoop, and I tried it with my knowledge the best I could to get it to work, and I just can't get it to work because of an issue with Zookeeper, but I'm not going to explain the details because you wouldn't understand them, and I don't even fully understand them, to be honest. But anyway, yeah, so we'll be running Nutch 2.0 in there. So you have local mode and deploy mode. Local mode is meant for testing. Deploy mode is meant for an actual production level crawl. But the end result is the same. The only difference is that with the deploy, you would be using Hadoop, and you could do a larger crawl in a shorter amount of time. But with what we're doing, we'll only be able to use one machine, whatever, however you want to call it. So we'll be kind of confined in how large of a crawl we can do with this. The workaround I've discovered or sort of invented for this would be to use Docker containers, Linux containers. And so what you do is you just create an instance of your container and you split up your crawls a few websites at a time, each small segment in a container. Now that kind of only works if you have a really high level machine, like with a processor with many cores and a lot of threads. Which I'm able to do because I have the AMD Threadripper with the 16 threads, 8 cores. But even if you don't have such a powerful machine, you could probably still get away with it. All right, but anyway, so the point is, in this tutorial, we'll be using Nutch 2.0 in local mode, single thread, small crawl, and hopefully you learn enough here that you can move on to the next phase if you plan on doing any larger scale crawling. All right, so the first step is to download Nutch and hbase. So we're going to be downloading the Nutch source, and then we'll compile it and then run it. hbase is the local database, the local storage that Nutch uses while it's doing its crawl. So as it pulls in URLs and branches out into into further nodes along its crawling path, it saves its progress in an hbase database. You can use other databases like MySQL, I think is an example of one you can use, but all the information I found has Nutch and hbase working closely together, and it works fine. So we'll just be using hbase. Okay, so I have in TextEdit URLs for Nutch 2.3 and hbase 0.94.14. Now, I learned the hard way when the first time around trying to make this tutorial that it absolutely has to be Nutch 2.3 and hbase 94.14, or at least in my experience. I did the entire tutorial using Nutch 2.3.1 and it didn't work. When I got to the first step where I would be planting seeds for the crawl to begin, hbase just kind of, I guess they couldn't resolve with one another. They couldn't speak to one another, and I just had to hang forever. And then once I bounced back to 2.3, it worked. So we'll be using 2.3 Nutch and hbase 94.14. So I have the URLs here. You can just copy them. I'll put them in the description if I remember. So let's go back to our server. So I have here a Debian server that I built for the purpose of this tutorial. It's pretty cheap parts, 4 gigs of RAM, mechanical hard drive, $50 AMD processor. Really nothing special, but definitely adequate for a single thread small web crawl. And I'm running Debian 9. But I have the machine. The machine is basically in its install state, so I changed almost nothing. I enabled root login, which of course I highly suggest you never ever do that for a machine that'll actually be online. But I'm doing this locally. I'm logged in, as you can see, to a local IP address 192.168.1.208. But this machine is basically in its install state, so we'll be doing everything together. If I run into any issues along the way, I apologize. I don't have all of this completely memorized. I have it written down, and I'll be going down the list. There's just a lot of configuration, and it's easy to make a mistake, typos, whatever. But once you get it working, it works, and you can just keep it in that state and just keep using your crawler however many times you like. Okay, so first things first, let's move to the root folder, and let's create a folder called Nutch where we will keep our files for Nutch and hbase. So let's make that folder. Okay, let's refresh here. I'm using Coda, of course. You can use any FTP text editor combination. I use Coda for everything. Coda is perfect. It has every feature you could ever want for anything web related or server related. And so we have our Nutch folder. Okay, so now let's download and unzip Nutch and hbase. So back to my text edit. Let's do Nutch first. I will copy this. We'll use wget. Is wget installed by default? I can't remember. Oh, yes, it is. Okay. All right, and then same thing for hbase. Okay, so the one other thing I did do, only because I tried to make this tutorial a first time and it didn't, I made a huge mistake with using 2.3.1. You need to, Debian comes with an installation of Java, but for some reason it doesn't work with, in this, when we go to compile Nutch, the default Java installation on Debian 9 didn't work with it, so I had to install Java. So let's just do that right now. If you already have it installed, I think this command should do no harm. So the command is apt install default-jre. Okay, so I already have done this, so it's giving me the already newest version message. But if you're working on a new server, you need to install Java, just run this command and you'll be fine. Okay, so now let's unpack our zips. Okay, so I just realized I forgot to delete the Nutch files that I had before, so let me just do that real quickly. Apologize for this. Make sure that's been done. Not sure where I was when I created the Nutch directory up here. Oh well, it's gone. All right, so let's make the Nutch directory again. Should be empty now. All right, and I'm going to drag these two zipped files. Okay, so now let's go into that folder, our Nutch folder, and let's unpack them. I'm going to rename them for simplicity's sake. I'm just going to name it nutch.tar.gz and hbase.tar.gz. All right, so let's unzip these. Okay, so we should have two new folders appeared here. All right, I'm going to rename these again just for simplicity. Nutch and hbase. All right, let's clear our console. All right, so the first thing is let's get hbase up and running. So you configure hbase, you start it, and then it just runs. And then when you do your Nutch crawl, when you start running Nutch commands, it will just communicate with the hbase instance and put whatever data it needs into the hbase instance while it runs. So let's open up the hbase folder, and we have a bunch of stuff here. Don't worry about it. All we're concerned with right now is the configuration folder, because we have a file in here that is hbase-site.xml. So let's open this. And it's just an XML file where we can put in various properties that will tell HBase how to run, how to launch, how to run, etc. And there's two we need. So we need to tell HBase where it should store its data, and then we need to tell it where Zookeeper should store its data. So so HBase is our database. Zookeeper, Apache Zookeeper is a software that I don't fully understand exactly what it does, but from my understanding, basically it is like a hub, or it's a way for different machines to speak to each other over a distributed system. So Zookeeper will keep control of that. I'm not sure why Nutch 2.0 needs, or why HBase needs an instance of Zookeeper, but it does, to allow, I guess, anything to speak with it. So anyway, all right, so let's put those properties in. So the first property is called hbase.rootdir. And the value will be, I'm just going to put it in the root directory. I will call it just hbase data. Oh, and sorry, that format is incorrect. Okay, and then the second property is the Zookeeper directory. That property name is hbase.zookeeper.property.data_dir, and I'm going to put this in the hbase data folder. And that's it. So we can close this now. Our hbase XML settings file is complete. We can close this. And so we should be able to start hbase. So that looks like this. So we're going to go into our nutch folder, then into hbase, then into bin, then we're going to call start hbase.sh. Oh, what have I done? See, I already have hbase running from before. I apologize for that. Let me kill it. Okay, and now I start it again. So yeah, again, I tried to do this tutorial first time around, and I made a huge mistake at the very end by not realizing that I was using the wrong version of Nutch, and so there's some relics from that. But don't worry, if you're doing this for the first time, calling start hbase.sh will work. You're not going to get this master running message. Okay, so I'm going to refresh my root folder and look for the hbase data folder. There it is, and then inside it there's various folders and files for hbase to run. Now I'm going to go into the hbase and just make sure that it's working correctly. So I'm going to call the shell, and I'm going to call the list command. Okay, good. So the fact that that completed executing right away and told me there's no rows means that our hbase is up and running and ready to go. So now it's time for Nutch. Okay, so we can exit this. Okay, so now we have to set up a few things with Nutch before we can do our first crawl. So I'm going to close this folder, open up our Nutch folder again, and open up the Nutch folder inside. And the first file we have to edit is in the conf folder, and it is gora.properties. And here we need to tell Nutch that we'll be, so there's, in two separate places we need to tell Nutch that we're using hbase as its database. I'm not sure why we have to do it twice, but that's the way it is. So the first time is here in the gora.properties file. So in the hbase section here with all these commented lines, we're going to add this line exactly, so you can just type this out verbatim. Gora.datastore.default equals org.apache.gora.hbase.store.hbasestore. And you can save, and you can close. That's it for this. Now, in addition to the two places that we will be telling Nutch to use hbase, we need to add the hbase dependency so that, or the extension, I guess you basically could call it, that Nutch will use so that it can speak to the hbase database, so that it has the code, the files to understand hbase and communicate with it. So we can close the conf folder, and there's another folder a little further down called ivy, and inside is a file called ivy.xml. Okay, if we scroll down, you can see there's a lot of dependencies here. There's a lot of things Nutch uses to run. Many of them have been abstracted, I guess, into their own little like applet or extension, and hbase is one of those. So if you scroll down, there's a bunch of commented out dependency lines, and these are the various databases that Nutch can use. You can see MySQL's here, MongoDB's here, and then hbase here on line 120. So just get rid of the comments. So it's already here for us. It's commented out. Okay, get rid of the comments and then save. So revision 0.5. And now we can actually compile Nutch. So right now we're dealing with a source folder. We need to compile Nutch, and then from the compiled folder we'll run it for the first time. So we can close this and let's compile Nutch. So we need to go into our Nutch folder. We're already in the root Nutch folder. Now we're going to go into the actual Nutch folder here. And we need to run ant runtime. Now, I already had ant installed. I guess it comes with Debian 9, whatever version I'm using, I think 9.4. If you don't, it's very easy to install. Just Google install Ant, Debian, or whatever operating system you're using. But I already have it installed. So very simply, from the Nutch folder, I'm going to run Ant runtime. This could take a while, up to a couple minutes. The first time it'll take the longest. And so it is loading all dependencies, downloading whatever files necessary, and compiling into a runtime folder. So this runtime folder will have two root folders, deploy and local. And as I said earlier, we're working with the local folder here. And you'll see, oh, it's okay, so this time it was quick. So now let's go back into our Nutch folder, and we're going to refresh. And you can see we now have a new folder, runtime. And if we open, we have deploy and local. And again, we're going to be sticking with local. And so we have a bin folder. This with the Nutch executable. This is what we'll be calling to run our various Nutch commands. And then we have a conf folder with various configuration files. So we're not going to be going through all these, just the ones that we need. So we're going to run Nutch for once, just to make sure everything's working, and then we're going to go over all the Nutch settings. But there's a couple we need just to make sure it runs properly for the first time. A couple of minimum settings. So here we have a nutch-site.xml file, and we're going to put 3 different settings. So if you open it, you'll see it's empty, and we're going to add 3 properties. The first is the HTTP agent name. So if you run a crawler and you have no agent name and you start making requests to various web servers, if they see there's no agent name, they may reject the request. They may see it as like a DDoS or spam or something, or a malformed request. So at the very least, you need an agent name, but you can call it whatever you want. Just get something accurate and something to do with your crawling. So first, the name of this is http.agent.name. And I'm going to call it Anthony Crawler. The second property, this is where we tell Nutch for the second time that we're going to be using hbase as its storage. So storage.data.store.class, and the value is or.apache.gore.hbase.store.hbase-store. The final property is where we indicate to Nutch the various plugins we'll be using when crawling. So for the first time, we're going to have very few plugins. So I'm not going to waste your time typing all these out. I'm just going to copy them off of a file that I have here. Okay, so these are the sort of the standard plugins that Nutch uses. Is kind of like the default plugins you would use. And we'll actually be modifying this towards the end of the tutorial in Elasticsearch. Okay, so we can save this. And now we're just about ready to crawl. We need to seed Nutch. So we need to tell Nutch what websites it should start at with its crawl. Of course, you need to tell it what websites you're planning on crawling. So that goes in the local folder. We need to make a folder called URLs, and then inside that we need a seed file, seed.txt. So let's make a new folder, call it URLs, and then inside that, seed.txt. Okay, I'm going to seed it with apple.com. Okay. Now one more thing I want to show you before we actually crawl is I want to show you the URL regex filter. Okay, so if we go back into the conf folder, we have a file here, regex URL filter, and if you look, you can see in our plugins that we're going to be using this file. So let's open this file, and this file is where you tell Nutch, using regular expressions, what URLs it should accept and which ones it should skip. You can tell it to accept any domain, subdomain, path, any way you like. By default, it accepts everything. But I tend to modify this to accept only one website, including its subdomains. because I like to crawl basically one site at a time. And if you don't put some restriction on this, your crawler is going to start branching out to other sites, and once that happens, there's really no telling what you'll get, what you'll scrape from the web, and it could kind of become a crawl too large to manage. If you're building a real search engine, then you would do something like that. But you need a lot of very serious infrastructure for something like that. You couldn't be doing this on one machine. Your crawl would take years, decades to finish. So let's just restrict this to just the apple.com domain and its subdomains. Okay, so the regular expressions for Nutch is a bit different than what I've seen in other like PHP or Perl. For Nutch 2.0 at least, it starts like this. And then we're going to accept HTTP and HTTPS. And then the forward slashes don't need to be escaped. For Nutch 1.0 they do, for 2.0 they don't. Not sure exactly why that is. And then I'm going to use an accept all, 1 or 0, 0 or more characters, and then put apple.com. So this way we'll accept all subdomains on apple.com. And then I'm going to put a forward slash, but after that I'm going to put in braces 0, 1 so that this slash can either be there or not. Both will be accepted. And then after that another wildcard for 0 or more characters, and then save. If this doesn't work, we'll fix it. It should work. I have the correct one, or the one that I usually use, in a separate file on a server that I had to take down because of the virus. But if it doesn't work, we'll modify it and we'll get it working. Okay. We should be ready. We should now be ready to run Nutch for the first time. All right. So first, go into the runtime local folder. Okay. Here we have our 6 folders, and the first command is where we seed Nutch. We tell it where to start, and that looks like this: bin/nutch inject URL. So we give it the URLs folder. It automatically assumes to look for a seed.txt file in that folder, and it seeds with that. So okay, right. So Nutch needs a Java home variable to be set somewhere on the machine. I do it in the etc environment file. So very simply, you're going to probably need root permissions to do this, or in fact, you will need root permissions. So if you're not on a root user, you'll need to switch or use sudo. So nano. Okay, now here you need to find out where Java is installed on your machine. Now I happen to know that you can find it by going to user, lib, JVM, and then it's this folder here. So it'll look something like this: export java_home equals user lib jvm java-8-openjdk-amd64. Okay, now whatever your path is, just put it in here. Save. We can get out of this, and let's run our inject command again. Oh, sorry, have to source it. Okay. Okay, so this first line, or this, I guess, fourth line, the injector will tell you how many URLs it has rejected based on your regex, your regular expressions, and then beneath that it'll tell you how many it has accepted. So our one apple.com URL has been accepted, and we can actually fetch. So the next command is bin nutch generate -top capital N, and then you tell it how many URLs you want, the max number of URLs that it should fetch for the upcoming fetch. So the top end indicates that these will be the top URLs, the URLs that have the most inlinks. So if you have URL A and URL B and you're only accepting one of them, whichever URL has more URLs pointing to it from other sources is the one that will be accepted. Now you can, if you don't care how many URLs you pull from doing this, you can of course just make it some ridiculously large number, and then you'll accept all URLs that because you're not going to find, at least not in the first couple of fetching steps, you're not going to find billions of URLs. but whatever, we could be 1,000 or even 100 would be adequate for the first time around. So we're only going to get just the one apple.com. So the first time around, this generate is kind of a technicality, but the next time around, it will actually generate the next fetch's URL list based on the most popular URLs. So you can see generated batch containing one URL, and now we actually fetch bin nutch fetch dash all, saying we're going to fetch all URLs generated in the previous step. And there you have it. 1 pages, 0 errors. We fetched apple.com right here. The next step is to parse all URLs that we just fetched. So Nutch will go through the contents of all the fetch URLs and pull out the data, and then pull out more URLs for the next round. So that looks like this: bin nutch parse all. Okay, completed. Next is the update db command. This will update Nutch's database for the next round. And then finally, this is where you would index if you were going to, which of course is the ultimate purpose of a web crawl. You want to index the data that you extracted, that you pulled, that you scraped, and put it into some kind of long-term storage. So we're going to be using Elasticsearch to do this. You can use Solr. Solr seems to be kind of like the more obvious choice, at least when testing for Nutch that I've seen. I mean, every tutorial I've found has done it with Solr, but Elasticsearch is where you really want to push your information, because Elasticsearch is the kind of the standard nowadays for search engines, at least, since all of its indexing features to find the best matching URL should a user be searching through your database. But we'll run this one more time, and then we'll go over to Elasticsearch. So we go back to the generate step. Okay, so we have a problem here. This could be because of the regex, so let's see if that is the issue. So I'm going to go back to the regex and just put it back to accepting everything. We'll generate again. Okay, so I think what has happened here is apple.com has been forwarded to www.apple.com. So let's just find out if that's what happened. Let's run fetch again. Yeah, okay, so yeah, sometimes that happens. A lot of websites, you can seed, but if you don't include www, it will forward you to that, and then that'll be all right. So let's run through this again so we can actually get more URLs. All right, this time around we should actually get more than one. There we go, 99 URLs. Okay, screw it, let's fetch all 99. So you can see here, this is actually good, because you can see here that by default, Nutch uses the most polite settings, basically. So we have a 5-second delay, and it's doing this because if you start pinging a server trying to scrape it as quickly as possible, you may overload that server if it's not very high in equipment, or it's kind of like a small company that doesn't have a lot of internet bandwidth or a lot of machine bandwidth. Um, but also, even if it is a large company that can handle the traffic, they may see you coming in at so many requests per such per small amount of time, and they may block you. They may think it's a DDoS attack, or they may just not like how you're scraping them so quickly and hogging their bandwidth. And that's happened to me twice. I've been banned. So I'm going to let this run, and then I'll come back when this is finished, and we'll move on to indexing with Elasticsearch. All right, so while this is running, let's actually go through all the available nutch settings and look at them one at a time, at least the ones that I can explain quickly, because some of them are a bit difficult to explain if you're not totally familiar with how a web crawler works, but I'll explain the ones I can as quickly as I can. So we have our nutch site file here where we had just the 3 settings, but these are 3 out of 100 or more that are all listed in here, nutch-default.xml. So let's open this up. Okay, and let's go through some of them, at least the ones that I'm the most familiar with. Okay, so here, this is a limit for files that are downloaded, not web pages, but files that come along with web pages, like a PDF, for instance. Here we have our HTTP properties, so we have the agent name, which we're using. These are So let's go to apple.com, for example. They have, so every website has a or most websites have a robots.txt file that tells web crawlers how to crawl their page. So here at the top, Apple has user agent, and they have an asterisk, which means they accept all web crawlers. They don't discriminate. Some sites only accept Google or Yahoo or Bing. But Apple allows all web crawlers. Now, Nutch, by default, follows a robots TXT page's rules. So every website Nutch crawls, unless you modify it and tell it not to, it will follow the rules that are listed in this file. So all these disallow. These are paths that Apple doesn't want being indexed. They don't want a web crawler navigating to any of these pages. And Nutch will ignore these. So if we go back here, this is a field where you can tell other agents that that a robot.txt might look for. So you could put Google here or an asterisk, and then if your agent isn't accepted, it will check to see if this one is accepted, and if so, it'll move on. This property here, robots 403 allow. So if a website doesn't have a robot.txt page, this tells Nutch to continue calling that website anyway. You could set this to false so that if a website does not have a robots.txt file on their root, that Nutch won't crawl it. So you have a description for your agent, a URL for your website, your email, a version, host, blah blah, timeout. Here is a content length for a web page. So if a page has more content, the content length is longer than this value, it'll be truncated. This is in case you want to proxy. So when web crawling, it's actually best to use a proxy so that if you get banned, your computer's not getting banned, the proxy's getting banned, and you can just switch to a new proxy and continue crawling whatever website you got banned from. It sounds impolite, but it's kind of necessary in this field. You have to find a balance between scraping pages at a reasonable pace and not upsetting webmasters. More proxy settings. Skip these. Blah, 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 blah. These are various settings for how a fetch should be done. So like this is how many seconds there should be between refetches of a page, so between when a page should be fetched again. Here you have ignore external links, so links that are not from the same host are ignored. I think this one doesn't include subdomains though, which is why I use the regex filter and not just use this property when I want to limit to just one site. So this, generate max count. So when Nutch is deciding, so if you have multiple websites that you're fetching and Nutch is deciding how to break that up, doing things on separate threads and how many lists to make, by default, it separates by host. So it will make one fetch list per host, and you can use one thread per list. So you can be crawling two websites at the same time, and it'll be on two separate threads, so they won't be waiting for each other or they won't be stacked. This says that there can be unlimited URLs on one list, but if they're separated by domain, that's fine if you separate by adding an extra thread. Blah, 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 blah. The delay, how many seconds in between. So the default value is 5, which you can see here. 5,000 milliseconds, which is 5 seconds. So that's why this is taking so long. You can definitely lower this to at least 1 second. In my experience, I haven't had any webmasters get upset at a crawl of 1 page per second. I usually do 2 or 3 per second, and even that usually doesn't get me banned. But again, it depends on the webmaster, the web server. And you can keep going down the list. You can read the descriptions here that will explain what each of these things does. You really have to learn how, you have to learn learn what these various properties do, because these will determine how you crawl. Like it really matters how you use these properties. It will completely determine how quickly your crawl is, if you get banned or not, if you get all the data you're looking to get. So really go through this list and read all of them. One that's very important, let me see if I can find it, is this one, fetcher threads per queue. If you increase the value of this to more than 1, the crawl delay on a robots.txt page will be delayed. So for instance, some robots.txt pages have at the top a crawl delay, which is how much time must pass between every successive call to that server. So sometimes you'll see crawl delay 1, which is that site telling you they only want you taking 1 page per second. If you make this value larger than 1, you can have multiple threads working on the same list, and so you could have 3 threads working on the same site at once, and you'll have 3 requests hitting the same server per second, or even more, depending on how quickly they get the response back. So this is an important one. This is basically how you can break the rules and get things as fast as possible. But again, you run the risk of getting banned. Again, so just go through this list. There's a lot here, but it really pays off to read them all and familiarize yourself with them. And even so, it will take a lot of practice to understand them fully. Feel free to post questions in the comments, and I'll explain anything I can to the best of my ability. Okay, so let's go back. It looks like we're done here. So we just finished fetching 99 pages. Let's parse them. And then update our database. And now let's index. So we have just scraped 100 pages. We want to do something. We want to put them somewhere so we can make use of them. It doesn't really do us much good just to have these pages and their content sitting in HBase. We want to put them into some kind of long-term database structure that allows searching. So Solr or Elasticsearch, for instance. We're going to use Elasticsearch because, like I said, it's kind of the standard nowadays. It's such a powerful software. The only problem is Elasticsearch's release is up to 6, I think, now. And I have not been able to get Nutch 2.0 to work with anything other than 1.4.1. So that's what I'll be using. You can, I think, if you needed to, you could kind of export from one Elasticsearch database and import to another. That wouldn't be ideal, obviously, but that's the best I've been able to come up with. I'm sure I'll try again in the future. But anyway, so that's what I'll be using, Elasticsearch 1.4.1. So let's download Elasticsearch. Use the tar. So I'm going to right-click, copy the link, and we will go back to the root folder. Actually, we'll go into Nutch, and here we'll download Elasticsearch's files. Okay, so let's go back into our root Nutch folder here. Let's minimize Nutch and refresh, and we should have, okay, so I'm going to rename this to just elasticsearch.tar.gz. And so let's unpack that. And refresh again. I'm just going to rename this to ES1 for simplicity. Okay, so first, let's launch Elasticsearch. So I have two terminals open. I've been going back and forth, but the reason I have two is so we can launch Elasticsearch and leave it running. Now, of course, you can run it in the background, which we'll do after, but just to make sure it works properly, let's go into this ES1 folder and run. If you open up, you can see there's a bin folder, and we will run bin/Elasticsearch. Now, Elasticsearch uses ports 9200 and 9300. It uses 9300 for receiving, I think, data for imports for indexing, and then 9200 for outbound requests for using it in whatever way. So it looks like it's running. So let's just make sure we'll use I think curl may or may not be installed. Let's find out. Okay, we have to install curl. All right, apt-get install curl. And now we should be able to see now that Elasticsearch is running. And we'll check that in the browser as well. Cool. So now we don't have any indices, and we can see that. We go to cat indices like this. All right, so we have no indices here. It's an empty database, and we want to fix that. Now, there's a couple things we have to change in Nutch. So the first thing we have to do is we need to add the Elasticsearch dependency so that Elasticsearch can correctly or effectively communicate, or sorry, so that Nutch can effectively communicate with an Elasticsearch database. So we have to actually go back to the Nutch Ivy folder and add the dependency there. So we'll just add it at the top inside dependencies, and that looks like this. Dependency and then we need to actually recompile Nutch, so it includes this this new dependency. So we have to run ant from within our Nutch folder. We have to run ant runtime again. Hopefully this builds. Okay, we should be good to go. Now we have to add some settings to our nutch-site file in our local configuration folder. So let's open that up. Now I don't have these written down and memorized, so we'll pull them from Nutch default. So I'm just going to search for Elastic. And so we have the various properties here. So I'm just going to copy these. These are the ones that matter most for this anyway. There's more down here that can be used to modify how many documents Elasticsearch will receive per bulk. All right, so let's go back to our Nutch site and paste these in. That's ugly. Okay, so the host will just be localhost. The port's fine. The cluster is, if you go to our, what is the cluster? The cluster is Elasticsearch. And the index name, we can just, it's by default Nutch, we can leave it as that. So when we push our content to the Elasticsearch database, it will look for an index named Nutch, and if it can't find one, one will be created automatically. Finally, in our plugins here, in our plugin includes, we have to add indexer-elastic, just like this, and save. Now, this may or may not work. I've always had trouble with this, usually the first time, but let's find out. So, we need to go back into our runtime local folder, And to index to Elasticsearch, the format is like this: bin/nutch index-all. Oh, it says done. Let's see if it actually works. Yes. All right. Cool. It worked. So as you can see, the Nutch index was created, and there are 96 documents. We have the size. We have the status. Now here is where it's up to you. You can go through the data if you want. Actually, give me 1 second, and I'll come back after a cut, and then I'll show you what it would look like when you actually pull some data from an Elasticsearch database. You'll see what content Nutch actually gives you when it crawls. Okay, so I have in Paul here. I'm making a request to the Nutch Elasticsearch database, and I'm matching the word iPhone through the documents, and this is what it returns me. So I'm going to copy this and paste it in the JSON formatter. And this, you can see, this is the format that Nutch scrapes. You get a timestamp, a host, ID, title. You get the content that it scraped, URL, and then it's up to you to do with this data whatever you like. You know, it's in an Elasticsearch database, so you can manipulate the data in many ways. You can actually create a search engine if you like. But yeah, the possibilities are endless. So once you have successfully scraped, the ball is totally in your court. Okay, so that wraps that up. I hope that you learned what you came here to learn. I know that some of it's very convoluted, and I may have over-explained some things, but I just wanted to get as much of the knowledge in my head out into the video, so that even though it may take you an hour to get through this, that by the end of the hour you understand Nutch a lot better and can actually move forward and make some use of it. But that's all. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned. I just noticed that I mentioned that I was going to run Elasticsearch in the background, and I forgot to do that. So I still have this terminal open, so I'm going to close or Control C, and then I'm going to run it in the background with no hup bin/Elasticsearch ampersand, and then Control C, and you'll see that it stays running. Okay, thanks.